Hello friends, my name is Katie and today we are talking about the last 10 books that I DNF'd or did not finish. Now DNFing books is not something I do very often. I'm very much a perfectionist, bit of a completionist, so I find it quite hard to let go of books, but I have been trying to work on that in the last year or so. And so I thought it would be a bit of fun today to talk about the last 10 books that I DNF'd, and these do cover about the last 2 years or so, because like I said, I don't DNF very often. And I might have missed one or two, but these are the ones that I remember. Most of these I don't own anymore, obviously, but I actually DNF'd something very recently, so I still have it on me, and that is Together We Burn by Isabel Ibanez. This is my most recent DNF. I DNF'd it just in June, last month. This is a proof that I got from work for a new released YA fantasy title. And I have to admit that I'm not someone who tends to love YA, but as a children's bookseller, I try to read at least a decent amount of it, and occasionally I'm surprised when I fall in love. But YA just doesn't tend to hit it out of the park for me. And this one I ended up DNFing at 90 pages. In this story, we follow an 18-year-old girl named Zarella, whose family have this 500-year legacy of being dragonadors, I think is how you say it. Basically, they're bullfighters, but instead of bulls, they fight dragons. And they do this for entertainment in front of people in a massive arena that they own. And it seems to be a bit of a sport in this society. Dragons are described by the main character as a pest, as cockroaches, essentially. And so basically dragons are captured and kept in the dungeon, and then once a month they're brought out to be slaughtered in front of a crowd. In the preface to this book, it happens a few years before the main book starts. Basically, something has gone wrong at one of these events, and Zarella's mother dies. A dragon kills her. It's tragic, it's awful, but her family continues with this tradition and this legacy. A few years later, it seems like their family's been sabotaged and the dragons have been let loose at one of their events, and the dragons basically kill a bunch of people in the arena and almost kill her father. He's really badly injured. So it has a pretty cool premise, very exciting, lots of action right from the get-go. But personally, I just found the main character utterly insufferable almost immediately. Essentially, she's a really, really privileged kid. Her family has a lot of wealth and a lot of respect and esteem within the community because of the position they hold as people who own this arena that slaughters dragons. They have servants, they have maids, they have wealth, all of the stuff. And obviously her family has experienced a tragedy in the death of her mother, but we're also sort of made to feel sympathy and sorry for Zarella because she's made out to be kind. It's really on the nose sort of details from the author that make her sympathetic. For example, she's nice to her servants. She says please and thank you. And so that means that she's a good person. Same with her mother and the way that they describe her mother. They just kind of casually drop that she donated her beautiful dresses to poor people one time. But that is contrasted with the fact that she is undeniably hugely privileged. And it's in particular the way that she talks about the dragons that it was a real turn-off for me. For example, before the event that her father gets injured at, there are protesters outside the arena protesting the way that the dragons are treated in the arena. And Zarella literally tells us, the reader, that these protesters are stupid, they're self-righteous, and they have no idea, how important Dragonador arena and slaughtering is. She's just really dismissive and arrogant is the best way I can put it. And then like I said, she describes them as pests, as cockroaches, and this sort of language just felt really icky to me. And I'm sorry, I didn't feel for this character. And I think from what I can tell from reviews, she does sort of have a change of heart towards the end of the book. But personally, I just didn't want to put myself through that. She is so insufferable, at least from my reading, that I didn't want to go through the whole character journey of someone realizing that, I don't know, animals and beasts deserve basic dignity. So yeah, this just wasn't a book for me, and I knew that I could get through it pretty quickly. YA books are pretty easy and quick to read, but I knew with how I was feeling, I would just end up hate reading it, and I have so many other books that I didn't want to waste my time. The second last book that I DNF'd was also a YA fantasy. It was Defy the Night by BRIGID KEMMERER. This book I got out from the library and I DNF'd it at page 30, so I didn't get very far in at all. Again, this is a fantasy sort of dystopian sort of feeling of a book. I didn't get very far in, so I don't have a lot to say about it, but it seems to be set in a world with a really big class divide and also a big divide when it comes to the access of healthcare. And along with that, there is some illness that is I don't know, on a pandemic scale. It seems to be very prevalent, seems to be very scary, and it is a respiratory illness. So I wasn't immediately sucked into the 2 points of view that we get right off the bat. But there was nothing inherently wrong with the first 30 pages that made me put this book down. Instead, it was just all a little bit too close to home with our collective experience of COVID, but then also my recent personal experience of COVID and being in hospital and the months of asthma and chest infection. And I could not deal with like descriptions of people's lungs rattling as they sucked in air. I couldn't do it. So with that one, it wasn't so much the book, it was definitely me. The third last book that I DNF'd was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I've still got my bookmark in here. I think I like low-key have hopes of returning to it. I got 139 pages in. I got up to chapter 6. And I actually did a vlog of me sort of reading 3 books by N.K. Jemisin and just like trying her out for the first time. This was the first book that I read in that vlog, and clearly it didn't go very well. This is a really weird sci-fi story that's actually kind of hard to describe, or at least I find it difficult to describe, because it sounds bonkers, and I guess that's because it kind of is. Basically, in this world, it's set on Earth, but it's just a little bit different, and cities can basically reach a level of maturation or age where they are essentially born into living entities, but they are born into avatars of people, I think, kind of, something along those lines. And at the beginning of the book, this birthing process is just starting to happen with New York City. However, usually with cities, the city is born into one person, whereas with New York, it's being born into multiples. It's being born into a person for each borough. So we're meeting these different people as they're kind of figuring out that something weird is going on and realizing kind of what's happening, and as they're trying to come together to stay safe and like help or allow New York to be born properly. There is a kind of like big bad mysterious enemy trying to stop this from happening. So a really interesting, unique concept. And there were some incredible themes explored in here, like for example, things around like land ownership, people's rights to like just exist in a place, gentrification, racism, all of that sort of stuff. It was really interesting, and like the cast of characters here was so diverse. I think it's one of the most diverse cast of characters that I've ever read, and that was just, it was awesome. But for me, and something that I've realized I don't tend to like about some of N.K. Jemisin's works at least, I don't enjoy when the themes and the discussion feel like they're taking precedence over the story. For me, this always just felt like a story in the background, but almost like it was more non-fiction. Like it was more N.K. Jemisin wanting to talk to you about some interesting ideas that she's had about our world, and she sort of threw in some weird sci-fi elements, but mostly it's about the ideas and the themes. And I've said it before, I love some strong theming in my fiction, but I don't know, I guess N.K. Jemisin just sort of sometimes crosses that line for me of what I personally enjoy. So I honestly just found this a slog. I took over a week, I think, in the end to read 140 pages, which, I mean, I can read that in a day easily. I don't read it every day, but you know, like I would read this usually in a couple of days if I was enjoying it, maybe a week if I was struggling, but like I was not wanting to read it all because I was not enjoying this that much. And so, I don't know, it was like low-key putting me into a reading slump. So after about 10 days, I just had to call it and DNF it. Before The City We Became, I DNF'd We Are Okay by Nina LaCour. This is a library book. I got it out from the library a few months ago, and I tried to read it, but I was not clicking with the writing. And I'm not sure, I'm kind of 50-50 on whether that was very much me and my headspace at the time, or whether it was the book. Because from memory, I wasn't doing great with my mental health at the time, and there was something about this where I was reading it, but I just wasn't getting it. Like, it's not that there's anything complex going on. There's literally, I think, just like 2 characters in the beginning, but I was just in that state where I wasn't connecting with the writing. And so I would like read a page and like have no idea what I just read, so have to start again. And I just wasn't getting in the flow of reading with this book. So I can't remember where I got up to. I think I got up to like, I don't know, 40 or 50 pages, and you know, I was sort of slogging through, and then they were due back anyway, so I gave up on this book. I have it again because at my most recent visit to the library, quite a lot of the books that I was interested in checking out weren't available, and I spied this one on the corner of the shelf, and I thought, why not give it another go? The reason I decided to give this a second chance though is because I had recently listened to Nina LaCour's new book on audiobook, that's Yerba Buena, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It moved me. I cried the whole way through. I'm not sure if I would have had the same experience with that book if I'd read it physically. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with me and Nina LaCour and this book, but I am ready to give it a second chance. Next up, we've got Dream and Sun, which is a manga series written by the same mangaka who did Orange, which is a series that I have some conflicted feelings about, but overall I did really enjoy. So I thought, why not try their other series, Dream and Sun? I bought the first volume and I got, I don't know, maybe a third of the way in, and I just wasn't vibing with it. I read this in a vlog where I read a whole bunch of first volumes for manga series that I've like bought the first volume of to see which ones I wanted to continue on with. And I think that was the only one that I just outright DNF'd in that vlog. Again, there was nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just I was not captivated by the characters whatsoever. And for me, Orange, although it has quite an intricate plot, it was the characters that I fell in love with. Orange has one of my favorite friend group dynamics I've ever read. And so for me not to connect with or care about the characters at all in Dream and Sun was quite a surprise to me. And the plot itself was never something that I was particularly interested in. It's a bit of like a romance kind of thing, I think. And so I just decided to DNF it. Next up, we've got the Rosie Project by Graham Simpson. This is a huge book in Australia. I don't know if it is Australian, but it seems to just be like consistently one of the best-selling books in Australia. And although it wasn't something that like inherently appealed to me, I decided to pick it up on a bit of a whim just to see what all the hype was about. This is described as a hilarious feel-good story about a socially challenged genetics professor. He's never been on a second date, and so he embarks on what he calls the wife project, where he basically tries to turn finding a life partner into some rigid scientific process. So it does seem like a kind of cute, fun setup. But for me, it was clear almost immediately that the humor, I found it offensive right from like the first couple of pages. I tried to push on for a chapter or two, but it was just so clear that this humor was not for me that I was not going to enjoy the book. Like the humor was so much a part of the book that there was no way to just like casually enjoy the story without loving the humor. And the reason the humor didn't work for me is because from my perspective, it was essentially a story where we as the reader laughed at how weird this neurodivergent man was. Like all his quirks and strange behaviors and the way that he thought, aren't they just also weird and strange and funny? So I honestly found that quite offensive, and it was quite jarring to dive into this knowing how much hype this has and how it's literally described as heartwarming, charming, funny. I didn't see any of that. It reminded me a little bit of like, you know how the Big Bang Theory sort of framed Sheldon? And how like the jokes were often at his expense. Like, yes, he became a well-beloved character who many people did end up identifying with. Ultimately, the show, especially at the beginning, was framed as if we, the outsiders, were laughing at how strange Sheldon was. To me, the author just so heavily relied on stereotypes of autism that no amount of awkward, cutesy romance could fix for me. And personally, I just don't like that kind of humor. To me, it feels dehumanizing, degrading, and just really off-putting. So I DNF'd that book pretty damn quickly. Then we've got Fairy Tale, another manga series that I read the first volume of. I think I got this out from the library. And honestly, this is starting to get a little bit further back in my timeline, so I can't remember a whole lot. I just remember kind of being surprised that this is as big and well loved as it is. Like clearly it was just so not for me, but it just felt really derivative. I remember feeling like I'd read basically this same story with this same character, you know, with a few things switched up time and time again, and it just didn't feel like this was offering anything new. It was all just very boyish as well, which is something I get kind of tired of too. This one might be a bit of a controversial one, but Where the Crawdads Sing. I borrowed this from a friend because, you know, obviously the hype was real a couple of years ago when this book sort of first came out and the year or two after it. And obviously that hype is building again now with the movie coming out. But my friend read it and she didn't totally love it, and she was curious to see what I thought, and I wanted to read it, so I borrowed it from her. And oh my God, was this book boring. I know there was this mystery going on, but I was not interested in it at all. And then on top of that, for me, all of the characters felt so one-dimensional. And I'm someone who loves like literary, slow-paced novels that are all like just in a character's head. I'm all here for that. But for some reason, this like tried to be interesting with a mystery and like this weird girl on a marsh, but I was bored. Like that's the best thing for me to say. I just found this utterly boring. Cloud Street by Tim Winton. This is a classic Australian novel, and Tim Winton is a hugely beloved author. I'd never read anything by Tim Winton, and I've been trying to read more Australian fiction over the last few years, and I think I've done pretty well at upping my count on my shelf up there. But Tim Winton is a name, if you're Australian and you care at all about literature or books, you will know that name. I think this has even been made into a TV show or a movie. Like it's huge. But anyway, a year or two ago, I bought Cloud Street as an audiobook. And honestly, I suppose I can check how far I got through it. Nope. I deleted it. I hated it that much. I deleted it. No, don't download it. I don't want it. And this is a family saga, I think in like the 1940s to 1970s-ish. It's been a while since I read it. And it's just about a bunch of families who are like very solidly working class. And like I said, it's been a while since I read like half of this, so I don't remember all of the details. But I remember, I think there was like 2, maybe 3 different families that were sort of at the center of it. And one family like inherited a big house and so moved into this like tight-knit community and sort of had to try and fit in. And there was just a lot of really terrible things that happened to these people. And I don't know if it was Tim Winton's writing or it was the narrator of the audiobook or a bit of both, but I just found this quite grating, to be honest. It just felt so miserable. It felt like all of these people just had terrible things happen to them all the time. And I didn't personally feel like there was any kind of like hope, or if not hope, then some kind of atmosphere or emotion that really drew me in instead. I guess there was just nothing that I particularly enjoyed about it. So I did genuinely try to push myself through this. From memory, I read about half of it, and it's like a 400 or 500 page book. So I think that's a fair effort. But at least at that point in my life, Cloud Street was not for me. Next, we've got To Sir Philip with Love, which was the 5th book in the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. So we all know when I read this. I read this right after the Bridgerton series, like season 1 came out, and I was in a total reading slump. I was really struggling with my reading. And so I'd never really read like this kind of like classic romance. And I read the first book. It was cringy. The rape scene is still offensive, but it was overall a very lighthearted, fun, good time. And I was very much reading it with my like critical thinking turned off, like just enjoying trash for the sake of enjoying trash, you know? And so I continued reading the series, and as I was reading, I was enjoying less and less. But when I got to book 5, I was genuinely mad. I was offended by this book. So much so that even though I did not finish it, I still rated it 1 star and left like a lengthy review. That is not something I do very often. And I feel like it's pretty common, at least on the internet, to like love Eloise. Eloise, especially on the show, is just a delight. So I remember not really liking book 4 and almost considering giving up on the series then. But when I realized book 5 was Eloise's book, I was like, why not? Why not just try one more? And oh my God, do I wish I had not done that. I just stopped before it got so much worse. Basically, the book starts out with Sir Philip. Like, Eloise is nowhere to be seen because he is married with children. And his wife suffers from severe moods, as he describes it. And it is made very clear to us as the reader that Sir Philip finds these moods annoying and frustrating. And he even comments on one point about the fact that he almost despises her because he's frustrated that she is so moody and depressed, and so therefore she's being a terrible mother. And so he's mad that she can't just sort of shake herself out of it for the sake of their sons. Basically, he offers her very little empathy and instead regularly implies that she's a terrible mother because she's clearly mentally ill. Now, I understand that these are historical romances and that mental health may not have been fully understood back in the day, but Julia Quinn was writing these solidly in the 90s, and I don't know, just at any point in history, I don't want to read about a man who treats his wife like shit because she's mentally ill. Especially when I'm then supposed to be convinced that he is a good enough man for Eloise, and I'm supposed to root for their love story? I'm jumping ahead of myself because, I mean, obviously he's still married, so where does Eloise come in? Well, spoilers for the first part of the book, but let me tell you. Obviously, Julia Quinn has to get this wife out of the way somehow, because we know it's a book about Sir Philip falling in love with Eloise. So predictably, the mother attempts suicide. But obviously we have to show Sir Philip as a caring and like heroic kind of guy. So he does attempt to save her. But when she dies a few days later anyway, Sir Philip tells us multiple times as the reader that he's not that sad because she's the one who wanted to die anyway. Basically, reading this series, there was a huge amount of problematic elements throughout. But for me, this is what broke the camel's back, I guess. It was just hugely offensive. As someone with bipolar disorder who has a lived experience of a suicide attempt, like I could not look past it. And even if I'm not like outright taking offense at it, I just did not know how for the life of me I was supposed to get past how horrible of a man he was to his mentally ill wife and then root for a relationship between him and Eloise. I just fucking noped right out of there real quick. I got kind of heated towards the end there, didn't I? What can I say? I don't DNF books very often, but when I do, it's usually because I'm either really fucking bored or really fucking mad. Anyway, I thought it was fun just to have a bit of a chat about some of the books that I've DNF'd in the last couple of years. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for spending some time with me, and a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for all of their support, and especially big thank you goes to Olivia, Lynette Brown, and Laurie. And an extra special thank you to my latest high tier patron, Marie. That's all from me today. I'll talk to you in another video soon. Until then, happy reading. Bye!